Is Dan on? Hey, Dan?
Yes, I can hear you.
Hey, great. So you all set?
I'm good.
All right. This is really loud. Or maybe it's just the empty room.
Mayor.
Call to order for Watertown City Council work session for April 10th of 2023. Finance Officer Bob Zine, please call the roll.
Thank you, Mayor. Bueller.
Here.
Danforth.
Here.
Helene.
Here.
Paulson.
Here.
Shetty.
Here.
Tupper.
Here.
Billhauer.
Here.
Thank you.
And Chair will now entertain a motion to approve tonight's agenda. Motion made by Councilman Vilhauer, second by Councilman Bueller. Any conversation on that? Hearing none, the motion is to approve the agenda. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed, say nay. Motion carries. Item A is a review of Title 25 cannabis regulations. We'll just leave it at that. City Manager Mack, you want to take it away?
You bet. Thank you, Mayor. Let me pull up this here. The discussion for this evening is around the licensing fees for cannabis establishments under Title 25 of the city ordinances for the city of Watertown. The annual fee for dispensaries, cultivation facilities, and manufacturing facilities is $25,000 with an additional $25,000 renewal fee annually. The city will reimburse $22,500 of that fee if the applicant fails to obtain a renewal registration certificate from the South Dakota Department of Health. You may remember that the number of medical cannabis dispensaries at the time that the ordinance was adopted, you all set that at a limit of 3. And in addition, the South Dakota Department of Health charges $5,000 in a non-refundable application fee for their own registration certificate. The goal of the discussion this evening is to review and contemplate the fee types and their associated amounts. You all did receive a letter from someone in the cannabis industry asking you to review the fees and the renewal fees. And that's what we're doing. So with that, staff and I will stand by for any questions that you might have and open it up for discussion.
Thank you very much. Any other input from staff on this? Anything that we have to know before we proceed with our discussion?
Thank you, Mayor. Generally speaking, I would say, which I'm sure you guys discussed when this ordinance was initially passed, is usually what contemplates in the licensing fee is enforcement obligations, administration of the license. There is a fee at the state level, but as far as dispensaries go, in other words, yes, they have to pay their $5,000 to the Department of Health to get issued a certificate. But the license and the enforcement of the statutes and the ordinance at the city level, basically they're pushing it more to the cities, the municipalities, to administrate this. The states basically issue their certificate, and the certificate, when you apply, is mostly things having to deal with, does the city have a zoning ordinance? Does the city, did you get your license from the city? Those type of things are in the renewal. So basically taking into account those things, is what would be the fee. The other thing is, obviously Watertown has a limited number. So exclusivity can also be taken into account. And that's basically all I have for now, unless you have any questions.
All right, I'm certainly will. City Manager Mack?
Lisa, could you maybe touch on process? So if the council desired to make any changes to the fees, what the process for that would be?
If you guys were to amend the fee, we would do an amendment to the ordinance. Right now, the actual fee number is in the ordinance. If that is what you were to do, just to kind of streamline this process in the future, if you ever wanted to change the fee again, we might just revise the ordinance to refer to a schedule of fees adopted by the city. So then that way in the future, if you ever, especially if it was to be then become recreational, was to be allowed, I'm sure there would be more administration and enforcement issues associated with that. And if you guys chose to increase the fee, then we could just do a schedule of fees. Also, in our research, different municipalities also had different types. In other words, they had their license fee and they had their renewal fee. Some have what I'm going to call almost like a penalty if their license got revoked or suspended and then they're reenacting it. There was, in some situations, an additional fee. Our licensing manager called around basically to all the other municipalities to see what they had. Some have a fee if you're going to transfer a location, you know, things like that. So just something to think about, which I believe is on your spreadsheet.
Attorney Carrico, just to clarify, is this, what we pass here is going to apply when, I mean, I'm just guessing that recreational marijuana is going to come to South Dakota via a voter's, something on the ballot 1 November. I'm just guessing it will probably happen. So will this apply to that as well?
Right now, you could make it apply, but right now you only have an ordinance dealing with the medical. Yep,
Okay, that's what
correct.
I thought. Okay, thank you. All right, let's open it up for discussion. Councilman Tupper.
Does anybody know on this list that you passed out, how many of these cities have a limit of establishments?
We will have our licensing manager, Jennifer Collins, come forward.
Thank you.
Hi, thank you for that question. I did not get clarification on that, but I certainly can reach back and get that information.
One thing, Councilman Tupper, is I do know Deadwood has unlimited, but that is because their zoning ordinance basically limits them just by the locale and where they can actually operate.
I would guess that the majority of them do have a limit on them, I would imagine, so, but that limit varies from community to community, so. Thank you.
Councilman Villauer?
Thank you, Mayor. I know when we pass this ordinance, I think we use the term, let's walk before we run, or something along those lines several times, because not knowing what we were really getting ourselves into the time. I guess I would ask from, I'm not sure who to ask the question of, from an administrative standpoint now, has this been unique relative to other licenses that we issue? I guess I'd like to hear from the staff as far as what does go into, first of all, are all 3 establishments up and running? They are, okay.
Yes.
So I guess what does the licensing, monitoring, whatever you call it, entail relative to other licenses, for example?
Do you want me to, or go ahead, Jennifer? You want me to? Okay. So I would say this is pretty much similar to the liquor licenses that the finance office does. I mean, at first it was the initial making sure that the zoning was correct, but now that those locations are established, it's there again, just us submitting that application for renewal to the owner, getting the paperwork back in, filing it with the state, getting the fee. So as far as the renewal process, I would say it's pretty much similar. As far as the law enforcement side of checking anything, I see Kirk is in the back for that. But as far as finance, the actual renewal process is pretty straightforward.
Mayor, if you could. I guess if someone could speak from the police department standpoint, if they're prepared to make a comment.
No problem. So to answer that, we do not do a ton with them as far as inspection or anything like that. That's still something that the state is working through as far as the inspection. But to Finance Officer Bob Zien's point, I do feel in the future that is going to be a burden that's going to come down to the city and the municipalities just on how it's handled. You can see that that push is happening in that direction. So in the future, it's going to be similar to liquor licenses where we're doing compliance checks and stuff like that.
But at this point, nothing is, you haven't had a whole lot of involvement. It looks like it might be coming at some point is what I'm hearing, Kurt?
Correct. Yep. That's just my own guess, just on how it's written. Okay. And as far as no real governing board by the state has really been set up. So.
Okay. Just one more. Mm-hmm. I'm not sure if this question is really germane to the topic or the subject right now, but those licenses are not transferable, right?
That's correct.
Okay.
Yep. If the current owner decides not to, then that would open up a spot for somebody else to start the initial application process.
Thank you.
Councilman,
Good.
did you have a quick question along those lines?
I was going to ask Officer Kirk, have you seen any, this is probably maybe not relevant to this, but have you seen much where we got people buying medical marijuana that are passing it on to other people?
Yes and no. Can I say that it's coming from Watertown? No. Have we had cases where people are buying it and giving it to others? Sure. That's going to happen with anything. So, yeah, we have. Yep, absolutely. I would say nothing along the lines of a vast amount.
Councilman Danforth.
Thank you, Mayor. First questions in general in regards to what the nature of our discussion. Are we being asked to consider both the application fee and the renewal, or are we only being asked to reconsider the renewal?
Both. Is that what it is? Yeah, both.
So it is both?
Yes.
Okay. So here's a question I have. And specifically to the medical marijuana issue is, we as a city, do we have any liability coming out of the performance of a dispensary? In other words, so if they got bad product there, for example, do we have any liabilities at all that could come from the result of a dispensary?
I would say no more than a liquor establishment. We license them in a similar fashion as we would medical marijuana, and we don't have any liability.
Okay, so that
yeah.
we have none, so it's all based on how they operate. They're the ones that are solely responsible, correct?
Because we're not required to test their product or anything like that, that's where the liability would come from.
Okay, thank you.
Councilman Paulson.
Thank you, Mayor. Can a staff member tell us how a liquor license is enforced and the difference? And the reason I'm asking this is because I kind of find these similar, not in the general sense that a liquor license is transferable. They're an open market. If someone wants to sell them, they can. This is not. But as enforcement level, can you explain the differences between, or how we handle the liquor licenses on our end?
So in terms of the finance department, I mean, the biggest thing we do is, as the police department is doing the compliance checks, we are notified of anybody that doesn't pass that compliance, and that's by state law that they're required to have a public hearing before the council. So in terms of the process, though, there's always a set renewal date. We give the notice to the owner of that license that you have 30 days to get your renewal package back to the city, and once they do that, with these are just, they're again approved by the finance department. They don't even come back to the council for their renewal. But then that initial license would follow pretty much the similar process. It would have to get approved by the council. Zoning would have to be approved, location, all that. So it's pretty similar.
Are there fees associated with that, with renewals?
Yes. Every license, it's $1,000 annually for liquor, correct?
It's actually $1,500 per year for a renewal.
Councilman Vilhauer.
Thank you, Mayor. As I recall, when we debated this, and I know he's not here to defend or to comment on what I remember him saying, but I know there was some concern expressed that, if we have these fees totally out of line, or totally, or a lot higher, I don't want to say out of line, that's a bad comment, but a lot higher than other license fees, are we opening ourselves up for any kind of potential legal action? I guess, Attorney Carrico, I'll direct that question to you if you care to speculate at all.
Right, so the statute basically says that the fee just needs to be reasonable. So then it becomes what is reasonable. The state hasn't really given a lot of guidance in the statutes specifically with the cannabis license. And that's why, the former city attorney, Matt Roby, did say that, and I would agree with him. If you get too exceedingly, then it becomes unreasonable. If you're outside of those parameters. I did not an extensive search, but I looked at other states, and I would say we're at the higher end, but not totally out of the realm.
Councilman Tupper.
Just a quick take from Councilman Paulson's question. Kristen, when you said that if the police department, or if they have a violation, they notify the finance office, I would take it that would be the same thing with a marijuana dispensary.
Well, currently, because the police department's not really doing any of the checks, I think our notification would come from the state.
Okay.
If at any time that the state was doing their checks. In the future, yes, as the police department would eventually probably take that over, we would be notified.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Councilman Beeler.
Thank you, Mayor. Attorney Carrico, do we have, are there any fees associated with the renewal through the state annually?
They do have to renew to get their certificate. For some reason, I believe it might be $5,000 again. But
So
I'm not positive on that.
I think that would be nice to know.
Okay.
If there's a way to find that out. Thank you.
You can, while we're here.
Councilman Paulson.
Thank you, Mayor. Well, I guess I just want to say that, obviously we had extensive conversations on this, especially at the council meeting that we decided to pass this. And I believe I was a no vote on the 25,000 at the time. Because, my argument at the time was if we're going to limit the licenses, let's don't have such a high fee. And now, such a short time later, we're seeing this be brought back. And I still feel that way pretty strongly, that since we're limiting it to 3, we're already limiting the licenses. So, obviously, I don't know what's right. I don't know if anyone does. Every city is different, listed in front of us too. So, what's right or wrong, I don't know. But I think, obviously, it's brought to us for a reason. So,
Councilman Tupper.
On your comment about the fee, and I'm not saying whether I'm for or against lowering the annual fee, but when we limited it to 3, we also protected their investment. And that was one thing I was a real proponent about. So it actually makes that license, it's just like liquor licenses. If they were unlimited, you'd be able to buy them for $20,000 a piece, but they're not. So it does put a value into that license. So even though it's non-transferable, it does put a value into it. So,
Councilman Vilhauer.
Thank you, Mayor. Manager Mack or Mayor Helene, what are you hoping to come out of this conversation today?
I'd like to know if there's a consensus to bring an ordinance amendment in front of the council to change the licensing fees. I would recommend with Attorney Carrico that regardless if you want to change the fees or not, I do believe that it should be part of the schedule. I was just looking at the Brookings ordinance, and theirs is part of the fee schedule as well, just to make these conversations a little less cumbersome. But in addition to that, if there is a desire to bring an ordinance amendment to change the fees.
Well, how about we deal with something I think that we can agree on, which is the fee schedule? Does anyone on council have a problem with that? Or Attorney Carrico, did you have something to say about that?
No, you finish your thought.
I just thought that we could at least address that part of it and come to consensus. Okay, so there you go, City Manager Mack. Okay, back to the fee then. Councilman Tupper?
When do we address the yearly fees again?
Those will come back before the council in December.
Okay.
And then they set the fee for 2024.
Okay, thank you. That's what I thought.
Yep. They'll be part of the budget discussion as well when we talk about revenues.
Councilman Shuddy, you have wonderful stuffed animals back behind your right shoulder.
Yeah, I'm actually at the city library in West Point, Nebraska. So that happens to be the spot they put me. On the, well, as far as the fees go, is it fair? Well, number one, as we legally review everything, these are good questions, and appreciate City Attorney Carrico and working through the legal side of it, because we want to be within our legal realm and be within reason, of where we're going with this process. Now, as far as walk before we run, that is something that was that's what we're doing right now. We're still walking this out, so that's good. I'm wondering if there's any other cities that may be looking it over too, going, well, is this enough? Maybe it should be more. So, there's even that concept that there might be others kind of doing the reverse of what we're doing, trying to figure out what the right thing is too, going the other direction up. So if we're still within our legal parameters, and in which that, again, there's some gray area there. Again, the walk before we run, then maybe it's wise to keep walking this out where we're at and continue to kind of see where things look. If we want to review renewal fees or something down the road, that the second year after that, or all that, that's one other subject too. But just my thoughts on as we're working this out.
City Manager Mack?
To answer an earlier question, the Department of Health charges a non-refundable application fee of $5,000 for each medical establishment registration certificate. The same fee applies for an initial or renewal application.
Councilman Danforth.
Thank you, Mayor. You've actually tried to find our meetings that we had on this, and I wasn't able to actually locate them in our archives. I still want to do that and watch that, because there was a lot of public input, and there was a lot of discussion at our level here, and a lot of things considered. And if you recall, at that time, it appeared like recreational vehicles. I suppose this is, but recreational marijuana was coming right around the corner. And the only thing that we had in front of us at that time was medical, but we had a lot of discussion about how we compare this to liquor licenses. And a liquor license out on the street is $180,000 to $200,000. And so there were some expressions made by those establishments that are saying, boy, if you go too cheap on here, look what that does to my business. It's kind of one of these deals. We got a lot of balls in the air in trying to juggle this. But those were discussions that were had, and the walk and then learn to run, it was another one. We also said it's a lot harder to increase a fee than it was to decrease a fee. If we found ourselves needing to increase it, that is a lot harder. So I do believe that at least the two that come to my mind that we at least felt were probably numbers that we could use in our evaluation. One was Sioux Falls and one was Aberdeen. And I think Sioux Falls had the $25,000, and I think we replicated that for the most part, because we figured if Sioux Falls is reasonable, then we must be reasonable. I think is kind of where we were at. But so those are just baseline comments. But I do have a question that if a change were made, I'm assuming that's only on a going forwards basis. There's no retro reimbursements, anything there. It would be upon renewal going forward, upon a new issuance or application for a license.
That'd be our recommendation.
Correct.
Mm-hmm.
Councilman Vilhauer.
I guess I would just piggyback on what Councilman Danforth just said about any kind of retroactivity, because I know in the letter that you referenced earlier, Manager Mack, there was a request that this be made retroactive. If we were to change something, I am definitely not in favor of that. As to renewal, we have 3 different licenses that were issued at 3 different times. When are they coming up for renewal?
So 2 of them were just renewed, and the third one renews in August.
Okay, so 2 of them have been
Yes.
renewed already?
Yes.
And their fee was paid with the renewal?
Yes.
Another one in August now?
Another one in August. So to the question, my suggestion would be is if the fee is reviewed, it would be effective 2024, essentially. So then that way, because you've got 2 applicants that have already paid their renewal, the third one will be here in August.
Okay.
And Finance Officer Bob Zine, for clarification, the one that has yet to renew, is that the one that we have received the letter from?
No.
Okay. Councilman Tupper.
Go back to the question of difference between medical and recreational. Would we, and maybe this is for City Attorney Carrico, if and when, that's a pretty common way of looking at it, they wrote in recreational marijuana, would this process start all over, or would these licenses, I don't think our ordinance would allow these licenses just to turn into recreational marijuana?
Correct. Ours is just about medical.
These are just medical,
Yep.
correct? So,
And as point of clarification, just because our finance officer did not know, yes, the correspondence that we got from the one dispensary is the one that renews in August. The other thing to keep in mind, just because I know you guys have had conversations about, or made comments about the liquor license, is that in the statutes, the state does refer to market rate when they're talking about liquor licenses. However, when they did the medical cannabis, they just used the word reasonable.
so when some cities are able to issue more liquor licenses where Watertown isn't because of the population, and they say market rate. Is there anything in that, to your knowledge, I mean, you may not have the answer, is there anything in that language that states it has to be how did they put it in the medical marijuana?
Reasonable?
Reasonable price?
A reasonable market rate?
Yeah.
I would say I would need to look that up.
Okay, thank you.
I don't want to, I realize everybody sometimes thinks the attorney's a walking statute book, but yeah, I would need to look that up. Thank you.
Councilman Beeler.
Thanks, Mayor. Attorney Carrico, well, I guess for the staff, the folks that got to renew in August, are we going to be in a pickle if we lower this for them since the other guys have already paid the renewal of $25,000? How do we handle that? Anybody have a suggestion in that regard?
Well, Finance Officer Bob Zina just suggested that we make, if you change the fee, that's effective for 2024. So those that renew in August would still have to pay the fee as it sits today, and going forward, it would be a new fee if you so decide.
Councilman Vilhauer.
But you do need to have some direction sooner rather than later, because you are starting to work on the 2024 budget now, which is why we need to give you some guidance in the near future. I guess I would like to have some sense of what other communities are doing with their fees, because I think that will, I've got my initial thoughts on this right now, but I guess I would like to know what other communities might be doing with their, primarily their renewal fees. I'm not inclined to budge on the initial application for the next license that comes along, but the renewal fees, I think that would be something I would like to know what other communities might be considering doing. I mean, no, I mean, as far as what they might be considering. We know where they are right now, but I think the comment was made earlier that we don't know what might be happening out there or across the state. That's what I'm referring to.
Councilman Danforth.
I'm in agreement with Mr. Vilhauer here, Councilman Vilhauer, that the application amount, to me, that should just stay the same. To me, what's in question is the renewal. And that's where I'm at. I would agree that's probably the bigger area for me. Even historically looking back, I would probably still go with what we have here. But as far as an application for a new license, to me, the reconsideration on our part really is, I shouldn't say for us, for me, is the renewal. I think the initial fee is okay. It should be kept as is, and that we should consider anything going forward would be the renewal.
Okay. I have been quiet. I don't have a problem with the fee as is right now. I think it has value, limiting it to 3, and I also am thinking if recreational ever comes and we lower this value, we lower it down to 5,000, well, that's going to be the going rate for recreational licenses then too, because we're not going to be able to change it. Again, easier to go down than up. So I am okay keeping it as is. Excuse me? For renewal and ongoing, yeah. I'm not saying that's just my opinion. Councilman Beeler?
Yes, thank you. And of course, we respect your opinion. But I beg to differ on that subject. When we got a $5,000 annual renewal fee with the state, I'm okay with the $25,000 initial fee, but I think, and you look down this list, most everybody but one is $3,000. Well, Sioux Falls has a much higher one, $25,000. They're the only ones on this sheet that have that. So you're looking at, if we did it $5,000, we'd be looking at $10,000 for those. To me, it seems like a punitive fee. I think we're charging more than we need to for that. I think some of these folks, they started a business, they want to succeed, and I would hope we'd want them to succeed as well. And I think this puts unnecessary burden on them. I think $5,000, in my opinion, would be sufficient for renewal. And then combined with the 5 for the state, that's $10,000. Thank you.
I'm just thinking that we didn't get a complaint from the 2 other businesses, so obviously they're making money as is now, and they want to stay in the business. So obviously it's profitable now. We're not driving them out of business with the renewal fee. Not seeing their books. Again, just my opinion. Anybody else? Councilman Paulson?
I guess just to reiterate, I agree with Bruce on this one. I think considering lowering the renewal, but I do agree with everyone else that the initial application should remain the same.
All right. Do we have any clear-cut consensus to send to staff? I mean, okay, so the initial application we're all fine with. It's the renewal, so we've at least accomplished 2 things with the fee schedule and the application. So Council City Manager Mack?
Just a comment for what it's worth to Councilman Vilhauer's question about other communities. I've not seen anything come through the city manager's listserv. Usually if people are changing fees, hey, what are you guys doing around this? I haven't seen anything. I don't know if you've seen anything come through the finance officer's listserv. We could certainly reach out to these communities individually, but I haven't seen anything on the forefront that they're looking at changing fees for medical marijuana.
And I respect your comment, Manager Mack. I don't want to see staff, chasing their tail on this and probably not getting as much information. So, your comment is fine with me. I guess if I had to make a decision right now today, my thought would be to leave it as is, but I also have to keep in mind I'm not a marijuana proponent, period, and I've got to keep that personal bias out of this and remember that the voters, including we here in Cottington County, did approve this. So that's why I'm struggling with it, but if I had to make a decision right now today, I'd be inclined to keep it where it is, both with the application and the renewal.
Councilman Beeler.
Just for the public, so that they understand what we've got here on our little sheet, is that Brookings is $5,000 renewal, Huron's $5,000, Mitchell's $5,000, Yankton is $3,000, Aberdeen is $5,000, and Box Elder, South Dakota is $5,000. Sioux Falls is the only one at $25,000, which obviously is a much bigger market.
Yeah. You want to say that in the microphone, City Manager?
No, I'm sorry I missed that one. I
Deadwood's
apologize.
at 30.
Yeah. Big gambling town, a lot of money. There you go.
Councilman Tupper.
I'm kind of open to either one. I mean, I'd look at either one, but we still got to go back and look at when we limited them, we helped set that value. You know, we could, there was a lot of people thought we should have an unlimited supply, and if we had an unlimited number of licenses, none of them would have survived. So we did add that value to that when we limited them, so.
Councilman Shetty.
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, I concur with Councilman Velhauer and Mayor Holeen, and who I think I have one or two others as far. Well, I think many of us were for the keeping the application as is, the majority. As far as the renewal fee, I'm more inclined to wait it out yet as far as changing that myself. But I am open to discussion if there is some valid points that can change it. But right now, it's just kind of. I'm not seeing any validity to, I mean, there's some good thoughts, don't get me wrong on that, but as far as even legally on that, keeping it the same for now. However, I would be open to, if there is a good case on changing the renewal fees. Thank you.
All right. Any further discussion? All right. We'll move on to item B then. A discussion on a proposed ordinance amendment pertaining to the declaration of snow emergencies and associated parking regulations in the streets and public ways of Watertown. City Manager Mack.
Thank you, Mayor. I'll turn a majority of this over to our Public Works Director and our Street Superintendent. But this is an initial discussion regarding what we anticipate to be a series of updates to our citywide snow removal policies and procedures. Hopefully, knock on wood, we're out of the need for major snow removal from here until hopefully December. Might be sooner than that. So we thought now's the time to start having the discussion about what we could change to help improve operations in the future. What you have in front of you is a host of suggestions for amendments to the ordinance language that accomplishes the following. It gives the city manager or their designee the authority to declare a snow emergency. It removes the 2-inch snowfall requirement, and we'll talk a little bit about why that's sometimes problematic. It retains the inability to park on streets when snow emergencies are declared. It provides for the parking on boulevards if needed. It defines the snow emergency and how declarations of such are shared through standard PSA procedures. We, like I said, believe that we'll have a number of recommendations going forward over the next couple of months as it relates to generally just snow removal, plowing schedules, things like that. Heath, if you have anything else to add, please do so. Otherwise, we will stand by for comments and questions.
Public Works Director Von Eye.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Manager Mack. I would only just preface any discussion with this is just an initial phase, like Amanda talked through there, that of several, well, I wouldn't say several, but of a number of snow removal improvements that Superintendent Bainan and I have been working on, talking about, discussing how do we improve our efficiencies in the snow removal process each and every winter. What do we have that's in the books that's maybe tying our hands or preventing us from performing at our best? And so the reason I point that out is this isn't the one and done process here as far as improving the snow removal ordinances or policies and procedures, but just a first step. One of the things that really does tie our hands is the 2-inch snowfall language that's in our ordinance right now. The way it's written right now, and you'll see on the screen I've got shared to teams here, is in the black struck out language. All the black text here is the original ordinance text, and then of course what's struck is what's being proposed to be replaced with the red text. but we can't effectively ticket and tow or require no parking on the streets until that 2 inches of snowfall has occurred. So you can imagine any given snow event, let's say we get an inch of snow, and we're out needing to plow and clear streets, especially the emergency snow routes. This language prevents us from effectively ticketing and towing and requiring people not to park there because we have this 2 inch minimum. Another factor that comes into play is each storm is a little bit different in that the winds and the direction of the winds and the drifting that occurs on the streets, especially in the fringe areas of town. We could get a half-inch snowfall and see a lot of drifting and need cars off the streets and not be anywhere near this 2 inch language. So what we wanted to do is simply remove that and implement what we would call a snow emergency, which several communities do. They declare a snow emergency in any given event where the need is there, that we need to get the plows out and we need to have cars out of the way in order for them to properly function. So that's really the brunt of this change, is eliminating that 2 inch language and allowing for a snow emergency to be declared by the city manager or their designee, which of course would either be myself as the public works director or Rob Bainan as the street superintendent, who the three of us collectively have been, since we've been under a city manager form of government, have worked collectively on determining what we're doing and how we're fighting the snow and ice storm events and treating the roadways. So that collective discussion will continue to occur with the city manager and the street superintendent, myself. Then the other components to this, again, this is all housed in Chapter 18 of the city code. The other portion of this, I don't think this will get used a lot, but there are times it would be needed. We prohibit any parking on the boulevards unless there's special permission given by a city official. Well, we've added to that in this red language, or if a snow emergency has been declared. Some folks' boulevards are going to be packed full of snow. We realize that, and they're not going to want or need to park there. But in certain situations, in certain boulevard areas, there is room and adequacy for a vehicle to park off the street out of the way for folks that may not have a separate private driveway or a garage to park in or things of that nature. So we just added a sentence in there to address that being okay through a snow event. And the last portion here in red is simply defining what the declaration of a snow emergency is. That's pretty self-explanatory when deemed necessary by the city manager or their designee. That's all I have. Superintendent Bainan's online, and I'll stand by for questions or let Rob expand on anything if he feels the need.
Street Superintendent Bainan, would you like to say something at the beginning of our comments?
I think Heath and Amanda covered it quite well. I don't know that I could add anything. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Let's open it up for discussion. Councilman Paulson.
Thank you, Mayor. Although I generally agree with this, actually I do agree with it, but I do have a main concern, and that would be, how are we getting this out to the public if it is declared a snow emergency, if there's not a set amount? Because if we just start declaring snow emergencies every time it snows and people don't know, then there's going to be a lot more ticketing, and it's a hindrance to the citizens. So I guess that's my main concern. If we have a good way to address that, I guess I would like to hear that.
Thank you, Councilman Paulson. First and foremost, that's why we're starting now, as we're sort of out of the season, so we can continue to educate the public as we get closer to snow removal season. We'd likely continue to do a series of PSAs leading up to it. I also, in previous communities I've worked in, there's usually a couple of grace snows that happen, and even in communities that have had policies like this established for quite some time, people tend to forget. So you issue the alert and you give warnings. You know, this is your warning to get your car moved. Next time it's going to be ticketed or towed. So there's a lot of leeway within the administration of it that can happen. But then at some point, you know, repeat offenders, we got to get your cars out of the way so we can move snow, whether that's downtown or uptown or on the fringe areas of the community.
Councilman Danforth.
Thank you, Clint. I agree with the removal of the 2-inch because we could have just simply a lot of snow and wind. There's also times when I've seen where we get out, and oftentimes it's usually when we have a lot of ice and slush and then snow, where we get the roads cleared and there's still a mess. And so they get things cleared so we can move around. There may be a necessity to go back and to go back over our streets and such in order to get them cleared effectively. So I agree with that and calling in, and I'm sure that at the same concern, Colin, you did, is how are we gonna let them know? But there's only so many ways for us to let them know, and it's the same ones that they're getting today for the most part. So I'm good with that. The one question that I do have is, and this may be an issue for Rob, I don't know that, but Amanda, I'll throw this out to you, is to what level is our policy or the procedure for removing snow defined within the ordinance language? And the reason where I'm coming from with this is in that northeast part of town, that Eastwoods area, for years I've had multiple complaints of snow removal up in that area. And so I don't know if that is just a procedural thing in the manner that we're doing it, or is that an ordinance thing that's dictating how that's done up there?
It's a little of both, and these guys can dive into it a little further, but you'll also notice that we're looking to strike the language that, you know, we, on Monday, Wednesdays, and Fridays, we do streets. On Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Saturdays, we do avenues, especially as the town continues to grow from the edges out. That is a hindrance on operations and getting to areas that need to be cleared out. You know, if it's a Wednesday and they don't fall on that day, then they got to wait until the next day. So part of the rationale for removing that is to just allow for more streamlined operations. The second piece of it, and that'll be coming in subsequent conversations, I think if we look at, you know, what are the emergency routes? I know Rob's put some time and thought into, do we need to change that a little bit? Do we need to add more? We've had some preliminary conversations about zone plowing. You know, do we divide the town into zones like some other communities do? We haven't really landed on a strong recommendation one way or the other on those. But to simply answer your question, it's a little bit of both. It's procedure and it's the way that the ordinance is currently written.
Council, a follow-up?
So is that, are snow routes part of our ordinance, define snow routes, or is that outside of that where we have the flexibility without changing ordinances, going through and modifying, adding, deleting, whatever snow routes? Is that more of a policy and procedural thing?
That's a Public Works question.
Ordinance.
I'll ask Rob if there's an exact list of streets, but I also will touch on the northeast part. Rob has inherently, even though it's not formally listed, added, like I think it's 10th Avenue running east into that subdivision up the northeast part of town. And then one of the north-south streets up there too, they've added to the administrative function of a emergency snow route, realizing that that subdivision needs some level of emergency access as well. But to that point, Rob, can you verify whether the ordinance lists those specific streets, or is that administratively carried out?
Yeah, that's not in the ordinance. It's straight policy as far as plowing goes. So it's not in the ordinance that I know of.
We do have an emergency snow route map, Councilman, that we're working on updating. And even though it's not adopted by ordinance, that's something we could definitely bring to the council for information purposes and let you know what exactly that looks like and where those streets that we've added in that northeast part of town are exactly at and how that's been functioning.
Councilman Tupper.
This question probably more for Rob and maybe I think it was set up that way many, many years ago for when we did streets on one day and avenues on the other. That allowed a lot of people to if it was your street day, you pulled your car off the street and put it on the avenue. Do you see that still happening, Rob, or doesn't it happen that much anymore?
You know, I don't think a lot of people do that. I think in the core of town, you might have a handful of locations that folks do that, where they pull around the corner as if they don't have a driveway or an alley to park in their back area. But most newer areas of town, on the outskirts, I guess, most of those folks have large driveways and plenty of space to park in their driveway area. So, you know, the streets and avenues thing, I don't see from my perspective that that's a large deal or a large problem for most. Where it's going to be a problem for folks would be the old core of town. The outskirts shouldn't be a problem at all.
Follow up?
So then you wouldn't see that being an issue. I know you've had to have some thoughts on it. It's probably a little too early into the conversation, but do you foresee doing zones? And do you think zones would be a little bit more efficient while all your equipment is in an area, or maybe when you look up into the northeast part of town where that gets snowed in so much, you know, let's say that was zone A, you would start in zone A, or?
We do currently plow the outskirts of town like a zone setup, meaning outside of north of 14th Avenue, east of 19th Street, south of 212, and west of 21st Street. That in a rectangle, we still plow as streets and avenues. But the outskirts, all those Northridge, Eastwoods, all those areas, we plow those as a zone. We plow the whole thing at once. We don't come back and just do streets one day and avenues the next. It's more efficient for us to just roll right through the whole thing. So this ordinance change would help us in that way as well. Then what we would have to do if we would go to zone plowing throughout the city, we have to look at how does that fit in the inner areas of town, the older areas of town. Is there a way we need to do a hybrid for a policy for plowing, or can we go completely to zone plowing and do streets and avenues? That's what we're still looking at and discussing. But this ordinance change will correct a lot of issues we have with plowing with a half inch of snow and the wind blows really bad. And we have a lot of cars in the way sometimes. So this will help, I believe.
Follow up?
Just a quick follow-up then. Part of what you said, then, it would be more efficient if we did zones, because while your equipment's in that part of town, you could finish that quadrant of town. If we did do it in zones, how many zones do you think you'd see, Rob? 3 or 4, probably?
Probably a bit more than that. I do have a preliminary zone set up, and if I recall right, I don't have it handy with me right now, but I believe it would be around 7 zones. I count the downtown business district as a zone itself. So, and then the core of Watertown, that potentially would be a zone 2, meaning what I mentioned earlier about that rectangular area of the old area of town. The old map, the emergency snow route map, was based on the old core of town. It didn't even show the outskirts of town, like Northridge and Eastwoods. It didn't show any of that, or the lake.
So that zoning to me would be important, because if we're going to try to educate people to make sure they get their vehicles off the road, you know, they need to know what part of town they're in and, you know, what zone they're in or whichever. So, and make it a lot simpler to educate the public. So thank you.
Councilman Schutte.
Thank you, Mayor. Actually, I can answer Councilman Tupper's question as far as do people still do the streets and avenues. My wife and I and my neighbors to my north and neighbors to my south, we all do that yet, just on our side of the street. So I represent, Ward C, which is the, let's just say the older part of town, from the downtown to 212 and from 81 over to the pool, the third over there. That square area there, just on my street, my block that I'm on, the house just to the north of me, it's a house with a garage and a driveway, 2-car garage and driveway. However, it's been changed into 5 apartment units. So in that one house, you have, how many cars with those 5 apartment units? So you've got them parking on the street and boulevard all the time. And then when it comes to the snow removal, they move their car if they happen to catch the snow thing. And new tenants sometimes don't understand the policies. So that's always with apartments, you see that issue. But once they understand the process, they park. They follow the avenue or the street. My wife and I do the same thing. Just looking at our house, there was a point when we had 4 boys in high school. We had a senior, junior, and a freshman. And so at least 2 cars with that process. And my wife and I, we have a spot for 2 vehicles in the back. So then that would be an issue for us with having because you could look at it and see, oh, there's a spot in the back, but what if you have multiple people living in a home during those driving high school years? So then you got that issue with our particular house, and there probably is others. I'm sure we're not the only ones with multiple boys or daughters in school at one time. And then you go 2 houses down from us, and they too are a duplex that's got an up and down. And so again, with the number of cars, they don't have enough parking in the back. So that's just right there on our street. Then you go around the corner from us, and I found a couple houses where in the back alleyway, there's one it's whatever the address is and a half. And so it's another little living residence that accesses from the alley. Well, then there is no backyard garage area or access for them. All they have is the front. And so then they have to follow the street and avenue. I know of that one. These are specific ones that I'm aware of. And then if you go a little bit further, there's it's just the same. There's the same process on another house I'm aware of. So I've been doing some driving around and looking at these things here. And however, saying that, I find a lot of houses with alley access with a garage that can make it work for 1 or 2 cars. It's in the older neighborhood. The problem is some of these are apartment units. Some of these have multiple drivers. And so the process is then you got to look at how far we are from public parking. So then we got to go downtown, and we may have to walk, it's one thing to walk half a block or a block when I'm parking, depending where I'm at on the avenue to my house. But to walk, half a mile, I think I'm trying to think what I am from public parking. I might be 4 or 5 blocks, but some people are going to be 6, 7, 8, 10 blocks. They could be half a mile to 3/4 of a mile from downtown from a public parking. So we would, in essence, be forcing them to walk half a mile or 3/4 of a mile to follow the ordinance. Now, as far as the boulevard, that's an idea. But I look at that, and there's living in South Dakota, the snow height with the snow plows, it builds up over the winter and it gets hard. And I guess unless we try to scoop that, the entire boulevard and get all that snow off of there, that would be a challenge to try to keep that clear to be able to get a car pulled up and down up onto a boulevard. Because again, it's the challenges with that. Plus, also we've got trees in our boulevard, so then you don't have much parking if you got trees. And so, me personally, this would be a challenge. but at the same token, that doesn't mean that there's other people in these older neighborhoods that are going to have some issues. But probably majority-wise, they can probably make it work. But there are folks out there that are this is going to be a challenge. Even on my block alone, it's going to be a challenge. It's going to force those some of those multiple units. They're going to have to walk, quarter, half mile or whatever it is to make this work. So that was my thoughts on that as far as the boulevard and the parking, and just giving some more insight to that scenario. I also do agree though with it makes sense with changing the ordinance for when calling us a snow day, if you will, whatever the right wordage is. So whenever we call that, to have it be the city manager or designee for that, and even not having an amount of snow, that just makes sense. But I'm curious, any other feedback from other councilmen or anyone else on this? The older part of town is it is going to be an issue for some people. And that doesn't mean not trying to change old habits. It literally is going to be they don't have another issue or another way to park other than having to find some public parking somewhere, or a neighbor that's kind and friendly that'll let them park in their driveway. I mean, that's a possibility. But when we write ordinances, I don't think we take that into consideration. I don't think so. Anyway, just my thoughts.
Thank you, Councilman. Councilman Vilhauer.
Thank you, Mayor. Couple questions. One procedurally, it may have been answered. Is this the only ordinance change that we anticipate? I mean, I think I heard ordinance plural several times, but is this the only one that we're looking at potentially changing?
We may have amendments, related to parking, not necessarily downtown.
Okay.
But we haven't fully flushed those
Okay.
out yet.
Well,
But as it specifically relates to snow,
Okay.
I believe these are the only ordinance
And I guess
amendments.
that's probably my specific question. I mean, if there's more than one ordinance that we're looking at amending relative to snow, why do it in one fell swoop? But if this is really the only one versus policy changes, okay, then I'm fine with it. Secondly, I guess I'll ask of Rob. I represent a ward that a lot of it is done by independent contractors. Would this affect? I mean, what are we talking about? Potentially changes that would affect, for example, around the lake, Derby Downs, that area, because those are contracted jobs. What change would you potentially envision for those areas, Rob? Or whoever wants to take that question.
You want me to get that, Heath?
Yeah, go ahead, Rob, please.
Okay. Yeah, at this time, I don't foresee any changes in areas like that. What this could do, depending on how we build the zones out, if we go that route, it would be easier just to hire contractors as well and say, okay, after you're done with the south of 212 area, then we can have you do the east zone. I think we would have opportunity to use contractors more and not cross over in some of our work. Part of the concern is too with the streets and avenues set up is there's days when we might get done with plowing, say avenues days are shorter than street days. There's less miles of avenues to take care of. So when we're done with avenues early in the day, if we're done with that, a lot of times, we don't go into streets because of the parking issue and cars parked on the streets, and we don't want to leave snowbirds. A lot of times we leave that till the next day. Now, that's not always that way. It really depends on the timing of when we start plowing and how much snow we have. But there has been days where we could have kept rolling and gotten a lot more done, but we were kind of limited by the ordinance, by the Monday, Wednesday, Friday thing, as we didn't want to bury cars in that were parked around the corner. So did that answer your question? I'm not
Thanks,
sure
Rob.
if it did. Thanks.
City Manager Mack?
I would just additionally comment that whether it's city employees or contractors doing the snow removal, allowing us to call the snow emergency allows for the ticketing and towing if necessary, regardless of who's doing the plowing.
Director Von Eyde, did you have something to add?
That same point was all I was going to make.
Okay. Councilman Danforth?
Thank you, Mayor. With two things. One, just in general in regard to ordinances, is I'm a firm believer of what we have for contents in our ordinances, but they should be really at the 10,000-foot level so that the detail that enables us to do some of this stuff needs to be really in policy and procedure, so it adds flexibility. So we're not always changing ordinances, we're changing policy. So just that's in general. But the one concern I have about moving away from the avenues and streets is this, is that if you look at in most of Watertown is in the grid scenario, the way we do it today, we get let's just say we do the avenues first and I live on a street. Probably at most I'm about a half a block or a block and a half, depending on where you're at exactly, from getting to a cleared street. And that's assuming it's not an emergency route. So we are opening up accessible roads quicker in the north, south, east, west scenario than we would in a grid. Now that grid gets opened up entirely, but now the other grids are behind that. So they're not getting, and depending on the amount of snow, they're not getting any clearance until their zone comes into play. I think you're going to have a lot of problems with that, with people being upset. Because that's kind of what we have, kind of what we have up in the Eastwoods area. They always feel like they're kind of at the tail end of everything, and nothing really gets plowed up there. Well, that's kind of what happens up there. And because we do that whole area, I believe, Rob, right? That's done all at once up in that Eastwoods, northeast area?
Yeah, that's correct. We do that at once. We do, when we go into residential plowing, after highways and snow routes, if we do those, let's just say, for instance, highways and snow routes, the snow ended at 5 in the morning and we started plowing highways and snow routes, then we go right into residentials. And we always try to do the outskirts such as the River Ridge, North Ridge, Valley View, and Eastwoods and Dakota Commons the first day. Now, I'm not saying it always gets done the first day, but the first day of residential plowing is when we attempt to get those outskirts. And if the day is long and then we're sending everybody packing at the end of the day to go home and get some rest, then we'll do it right away in the morning, the second day of residential plowing.
But now the complaints I get up in that area, I'm always hearing that they're the second day or sometimes even later than that before they ever get plowed, and they can't get out of there if there's a lot of snow. But the point is, my comment is, I think we're going to be asking for some unsatisfied people with snow removal, because if we go to the zone scenario, if you're in that first zone, you're going to be happy. When you get into that mid to late zone scenario, and we have a lot of snow that's difficult to get around, you're going to have a lot of unhappy people, because now they can't get anywhere in their zone per se, whereas they could drive a block or half a block and they'd be on a cleared road, street, avenue, whichever.
Councilman Tupper.
Well, I was born and raised in Watertown. Watertown used to be pretty simple years ago because it was all streets and avenues. So over the years, we've conversed to lanes and drives and whichever else. How have you handled that in the past? So, say like Cherry Drive. You know, it's named Cherry Drive. It's not a street or an avenue. Is that kind of still treated like a northwest or north-south street then?
If I could
with
touch
the
on-
adjacent streets, or?
Yeah, I could touch on that. And part of why I wanted to chime in here is it might be part of the solution of the Monday, Wednesday, Friday discussion too. But essentially, this core area, as we've talked about, that's been that way for the longest part of time in town here, and why this ordinance was likely set up the way it was, is we have those north, south, east, westerly streets and avenue grids. So Rob and his crews do perform that Monday, Wednesday, Friday operations more in this, what I would call the core area of town. Now, when we get out into those subdivisions that have grown outside the core area, like those that Rob just mentioned a little bit ago, Northwoods, River Ridge, Valley View, Eastwoods, Dakota Commons, those that have built those kind of streets that are more meandering, or that subdivision itself is kind of off on its own, like River Ridge, they tend to just go into those areas and they do them all in one complete fell swoop. They don't do the east-west, north-south every other day alternating fashion like they do in the core area. That's just how they've carried out that practice through their policies and procedures. Now, maybe that's a point of discussion on how we resolve the concerns for the core area. If the council feels that's a significant enough importance to keep the alternating days in the core area, I think that Rob and I could work on a plan that could allow for that, and then we would just define this language that is struck could easily be changed to a different sentence that reads, upon the declaration of a snow emergency and within the confines of the core area, this every other day language would continue or remain in place. We didn't put it in there because, and Rob can chime in here at this point, the goal again is to get the town in totality cleared as quickly as possible from one end to the other. We want it done as soon as we can. I think the citizens all want it done as soon as it can get done. And sometimes that alternating day schedule actually delays that progress. They're done with the east-west avenues, and I don't want to say sitting in the shop tapping their toe, but they could be going on the north-south streets at that point, and they can't. They got to push pause, wait for the next day, and then pick up progress from there. I do know that that's occurred on several snow occasions, and Rob could speak in more detail to that, but that's one of the reasons we were looking to strike that language to keep the progress moving.
City Manager Mack, did you want to say something about that?
I would also just comment about this season in particular. Our crew spent an incredible amount of time just keeping the emergency routes and highways open. So it probably felt for some that it took a lot longer to get to them than normal. But we spent more time than normal on just keeping those main routes open due to the nature of the snow that we got throughout the year, the wind, all of that, because those are first priorities, and then we get to the neighborhoods as soon as those are clear and the snow has stopped.
Follow up, Councilman Tupper?
I kind of like that idea that Mr. Von I come up with maybe the two different types of areas, because if you look in your outlying neighborhoods, you know, like some of the ones you've listed, they've been designed over the years to accommodate people's vehicles in their driveway, where the core area of town was never designed that way. And that might help Mr. Shuddy's question about, you know, where do those people go? So might be that the core area of town, the older section of town, that might still be on a street and avenue type deal, and the rest of the community be on zones. So,
Councilman Shuddy.
Thank you, Mayor. I concur. Actually, one point I didn't think of, which Mr. Danforth brought up, was that it makes sense, because me living in that neighborhood we're talking about, or some of those older neighborhoods, when they do the avenues or the streets, whichever one first, depending on the storm, that as long as we can get that half block or whatever 3/4 block to a cleared street, that does help us as far as moving around and getting around to the main roads. So that is a valid point there. Or actually, too, I was wondering, could you write an ordinance that Mr. Bainan will give us a right from the public parking to our house, our neighborhood, if so be? No, but actually, I was curious, a question here for Mr. Bainan. The snowplow pausing early because you're done with the avenues, now you got to wait for a street day. Maybe this is a tough question to answer, but I mean, do you see yourselves where you're literally, or I guess not tapping your feet in the shop at noon, but do you see yourself kind of stopping at noon? Or is it more you just have stuff to do until 3, 4 o'clock? Every hour is valuable, I get it, but I'm just curious, how much time do you really have in a day? Are you pausing an hour early or 2 hours early? And then my thought on that is, if the guys do get burned out and they have to pause and quit at 4 o'clock because they could have gone for another hour or two, but I bet they started probably early that day. So if they do got to stop a little bit early, maybe it's even, if it's, I just was wondering, is there a way to get a pulse, I guess, on how much time this will probably speed it up. So I'm not coming, I'm open to any idea, because I want to be open to what we can do to improve. But these questions, we have some good questions here today, and just wondering on the efficiency, how much do we really pause? An hour sometimes, or 2, or is it half a day, or that they're waiting around? That's my question, I guess.
Generally, from what I can recall, probably the earliest that we've gotten done to where we could have went into like the other, whether it was an avenues day and we could go into the streets, 2 o'clock in the afternoon. I would say probably a max of 4 hours. We try to get the guys out of there by 6, 7 o'clock in the evening. And, if we start at, depends if we've done downtown. Sometimes when we're doing downtown, we'll start actually moving our equipment and going at 2 or 3 in the morning. So it's been a long day for the guys, but yeah, between, I would say 2, 4 o'clock in the afternoon. So yeah, sometimes it is only 1 or 2 hours of time savings. Occasionally up to 4 hours, I would say. Yeah.
Thank you, Rob.
Yep.
Thank you, Superintendent Bainan. Before I go to Councilman Beeler, I just want to say to Superintendent Bainan, Public Works Director Von I, and City Manager Mack that this has been a very long winter and very tough on people, but I do have to say I have received a lot of compliments as to the work that the street department has done this year. I have received a few complaints, but by and large, a lot of compliments, and I think that is a testament to the work that all of the staff has done. So I want to thank you for that. Councilman Beeler.
Thank you, Mayor. Rob, what kind of time frame are we looking at between getting the first zone and the last zone done? Any idea how much time that would take?
You're saying like if we went to a zone system, or
Yeah.
currently we kind of plow the outskirts like they are zones, but I can't answer that question. It's basically something I'd have to look into, but we do have we've documented how long certain areas take in what I would say is about a 2 to 3 inch snow event. And we've kind of kept track of how long it takes to clear each area. So I do have documented a documented map that shows how long those areas take with 2 or 3 inches of snow. So that's going to help us in putting together a zoning map for plowing. Because I'm looking at what I've been doing is looking at how long each team takes. So each team gets done plowing their area or their zone similar to other teams. So one team isn't done 4 hours before another team. So we're trying to make the zones similar in size or miles of road to plow, I guess you could say. But I can't give you a specific time frame on what it takes for each area.
No, I don't think that's what I meant, Rob. I meant if from the time we start, when we get the first zone to the last zone, when we move to the last zone to get that done, or the people that are going to be the furthest out, how much time would lapse between those two?
Could be 20 hours.
Okay.
Possibly.
Okay. And I have a comment as well, if I might, Mayor. And that is, I do like the idea. The way we do it now, it is kind of nice to be able to move to an avenue. We did talk about some folks being able to park on an avenue when the streets are going to be cleared. But it does make it nice in a lot of occasions for some people in their vehicles to be able to find at least an avenue or a street if theirs isn't done, and then they can make their way. In a lot of incidences, they can make it to the snow routes, the emergency routes. So that's a positive, I think, from the way we currently do it. Thanks.
City Manager Mack, did you want to say something? No, sir. Okay. Any further discussion? Councilman Danforth.
Well, I'm just sitting here pondering solutions here, but is it possible that we could have 2 different types of declarations? An emergency snow, 1 and a emergency snow 2, and 1 is everybody get your stuff off the streets, period. Now, I do think there's probably serious consideration for the hybrid approach, that maybe zone A, where we really do have the grid that we can manage effectively, the avenues and so at least to get people, because you got 2 issues. One is where do I park? The other is how do I get from point A to a point that's cleared? And so looking at that, we may want to consider some type of hybrid like Rob or others have suggested, but maybe we have 2 different types of snow emergencies. A Class A and a Class B, or a 1 and a 2, and 1 is we got a lot of snow, we got a lot of wind, a lot of snow. Get your stuff off the streets. And because we can't tell when we're coming, we're just going to get through this, and maybe 2 is the 1 to 2 to 3 inches, that not a big deal, and we can. So just food for thought is to, instead of having just 1 emergency declaration, or not a snow declaration, maybe we've got 2 levels that we could at least think about in regards to our process or procedures here.
Councilman Tupper?
That did bring up a question for me. Rob, is there any time that now that you do just emergency snow routes?
There is. Occasionally when we get, say, an inch of snow, we try to get the slush and stuff, like this time of year especially, we try to get the slush off the highways and snow routes as soon as we can. But there has been times where we plow the highway even if there's 3/4 of an inch of snow. And there has been times this year where we've done just the highways and snow routes, even been times where we've just done the highways. Just based on when the warm weather's coming and the residual that we have for salt on the road helps us a lot for next time snow shows up. The residual snow helps, or residual salt helps melt the snow right away. So
That kind of go along with Councilman Danforth's question. If if you had an A and a B or 1 and a 2 or whatever, if they were just going to do snow routes, then especially since we're eliminating the 2-inch, that might be a cause for that. So,
City Manager Mack?
What I've seen in previous communities and in peer communities is that there'll be a snow declaration and there will be an operational sort of definition with that, right? So we're declaring a snow emergency. We've started plowing emergency routes. Move your cars. Okay, we're ending the snow emergency and we're planning to do plowing of residential streets on Tuesday. So what I would caution, to Councilman Danforth's earlier point, is we don't want to get the ordinance too down in the weeds, so we don't have flexibility to deal with those things as they come up. And I think it could be reasonably assumed that the emergency declaration will be applied judiciously, as needed. I've also seen signage in other communities for the emergency routes that there's just no parking anytime along emergency routes, whether it's winter or not, to help aid in that when necessary. But those are all operational things that we'll continue to wrestle with and take into consideration as we move through the next few months into the next season.
Councilman Beeler, did you have something?
Thanks, Mayor. I don't want to make this too difficult, but would we consider possibly a hybrid of areas like Councilman Shuddy had discussed with his area, where they don't have a lot of opportunities to park vehicles, where they might have a lot of multiple vehicles, apartment complexes, but some of the older parts of town, is that something we'd want to maybe consider? Look at that and say, we'll treat this different. We'll do avenue streets in this area because of that parking issue, and then the other areas we could do the grid where people have larger driveways and other opportunities for parking.
We have laid out plans both ways. We have information both ways for a hybrid where we basically do part of the core or most of the core of town one way and do the other areas a different way. But I've put together several different scenarios or different ways of plowing the city over the last several years, just based on the problems we found out over the years. So I think ultimately, when it's all said and done, we'll end up with a very, very good operation that the public will understand. At this point, it's not real clear, I think, to some of the public. I'm sure there's a bit of confusion when you look at the outskirts when we're plowing both streets and avenues on the outskirts. It doesn't, it's different than we do the core of town. So that's part of the goal here, is ultimately before next winter to clarify our policies and clean up the ordinances so everything's clear to everybody.
Councilman Beeler, follow up?
Yeah, I just want to say, I just want you to know we appreciate what you guys are doing in regards to trying to improve on this whole process. That you're taking the initiative to try to do better and try to get that out of here sooner than later. Thanks.
I would just, for my own personal feelings, I can't say I necessarily like the streets and avenues. I'm agnostic on it. I certainly have been accustomed to that being the procedure in Watertown, and I think most of Watertown would feel the same way. So any change in that regard would have to be very well publicized and gotten out to the public. But with that said, I think the faster you can do something, especially with snow removal, you're going to make people a lot happier. So if it increases the speed and effectiveness of the plows, then I think Watertown would be behind it, and I certainly would. But changing the streets and avenues, we're going to need to have a very effective public information campaign. All right. City Manager Mack.
Just one final point of clarity. Just because we have the authority to ticket doesn't mean that we will ticket all of the time. So we can put all the PSAs out there and do public information campaigns, but that first snow, people are still going to park where they're not supposed to be parked. And that doesn't necessarily mean they're going to get a ticket. It just gives us the ability, if we absolutely have to, and the PD can back me up on that. So just to put that out there.
All right. City Manager Mack, are you satisfied with the discussion as is?
I believe there's consensus to bring the amendments to a future council meeting for discussion and approval. Did you have something, Heath?
Just maybe some clarity. There were a few talking points that would take some tweaks to this. Do you want us to run with the general discussion and add to this what we've gleaned from the discussion and bring back some form of a draft ordinance amendment for action?
I would say that would be accurate. Councilman Tupper?
Just a quick question for staff. Right now, all of our emergency snow routes are marked with signage that says anything under or over 2 inches. What would we do in that situation?
We'd have to change those out.
Okay, thank you.
Any further discussion? We'll move on to item C, a council discussion on potential updates to the Commercial Lake Zoning District, Chapter 21.29 of the revised ordinances of the City of Watertown. City Manager Mack.
Thank you, Mayor. This discussion is at the request of a few on this body. About a little over 2 years ago, the CL district was approved by the council, and since then there have been some questions and maybe some clarity that is being sought in the ordinance. What we would be looking for from you all today is first a consensus that the council desires to open discussions on the Commercial Lake Zoning District, and if so, it would be our recommendation that the mayor appoint a committee, of a couple council people, a couple from the Planning Commission, and staff will facilitate the discussion. From there, any recommendations for changes would follow the appropriate process of going to the Planning Commission for consideration and then on to the council for a final decision. So with that, we'll stand by for any questions you all might have.
All right, we'll open discussion by going to Councilman Paulson.
Thank you, Mayor. Obviously, this has been a hot topic of late, just because we had a couple rezone requests recently regarding the CL district. The CL district has been used a couple of times in the past, and it didn't seem to be an issue. There was no outcry, and that's where I guess I question this discussion. I'm not saying that there's not tweaks. There's tweaks to a lot of ordinances that come up and get addressed later on. But that said, I don't think we need to gut this or even necessarily have a whole committee on this anymore. I think that bringing an ordinance amendment that addresses some of the tweaks would be appropriate, but I would not support a full reopen the CL district discussion. I think it is working where it's intended to work, and yeah, I think addressing maybe the conditional use portion of it may be something to talk about, but our community overwhelmingly supported commercializing our lake more further. To utilize our lake, it's our greatest resource. We've all admitted that, and I think we've all kind of gotten on board with that. And I think I just think it's kind of beating a dead horse. This has been a discussion for a lot of years, and now all of a sudden it's an issue because one got denied or whatever may be the reason behind some of the concerns. But I like the district in general. That said, there are tweaks that should be had.
Sorry. Director Von I was going to give us some history, but first I don't want Councilman Vilhauer to wait too long.
Well, actually, I think what you just said, Mayor, I'll wait. I mean, what I'd be interested to hear is a brief recap as to how we got to where we are right now, because to Councilman Paulson's point, there has been a lot of effort put into this in the past. So I guess I would like to hear how we have gotten where we are right now with our current ordinance. So if it's Director Von I or Manager Mack or whomever, or our community development manager, I don't know, but I throw that out there for consideration.
Director Von I.
Yes, thank you. Giving credit where it's due, Brandy Hanton did help me put this information together, this timeline, and I'll run through it here with you briefly. So the whole CL district kind of initiated back in early 2018, and it actually started out as more of a resorts discussion. How can we find an allowance for resorts within our zoning ordinance? And so a committee was formed, a rather large committee, 22 members, on February 14th of 2018. They had their first meeting. Those 22 members consisted of city staff, several council members, the city attorney, members from the first district, city engineer, some planning commissioners. We're all part of that 22-member committee that started drafting a resorts language that was essentially going to be used as a conditional use permit in a multitude of zoning districts. Of course, at the lake, that'd largely be plugged in as a conditional use permit in the R1 zoning district. So that committee met February, March, April, May of 2018. In August, they had a final draft completed for resorts conditional use permit. However, about that same time, in December of 2018, we were starting to realize recommendations from the Lake Compesca Master Plan from our consultants at the time that were putting that together. So in that late 2018 time period, while the Lake Compesca Master Plan was also wrapping up, while this resorts discussion was going on in tandem with it, those two things kind of collided, and we realized, okay, why don't we instead create a conditional use for resorts? Why don't we create a commercial lake zoning district? And that's when that committee was formed for establishing a CL district, not just for Lake Compesca, but also for Pelican Lake as well. That steering committee was a lot smaller. It included 3 planning commissioners and staff that walked through the details of the current CL as it's drafted right now. They began meeting in, let me see, is it January and all through 18 into 19. That's all the Lake Compesca Master Plan timeline. I apologize. January of 2018 and through the end of 2018 was the Lake Compesca Master Plan. That was adopted in December of 2019. And from that, again, we gleaned some of the lake commercial discussion and talking points. And so we formed that committee, and they met December of 19 through spring of 2020. And they had meetings in December of 19, January of 2020, February, March, April, where the first, second readings at council and public meetings occurred. To back up into that Lake Compesca Master Plan process, of course, there were several public meetings involved in that process where the community was invited to charrettes of sorts to chime in on what some of the desires, wants, and needs of the lake areas were. And that's where we gleaned some of that lake commercial zoning discussion from. But then the CL district draft was formed and was adopted as of May 1st, 2020. Again, while the committee was smaller for that CL district, it was vetted through the Planning Commission, of course, through every zoning amendment, like every zoning amendment is, through the public hearing process for any zoning amendment at the Planning Commission and City Council levels, where public input was summoned and received to some degree. throughout that process. The members at that time were Diana Ford, Blake Dolly, Todd Kays, myself, and Miss Hanton were the primary members of that CL committee. And we did have a couple of visitors to that committee off and on. I believe a council member or two chimed in here or there, or the previous mayor perhaps as well. And but nonetheless, that was kind of the core committee that met on a regular basis to draft the current CL language.
Councilman Vilhauer.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you for that recap. I didn't realize we were going to have that thoroughly, Heath, but I'm glad you did. I guess looking back as to what all went into this, I don't want to see us throwing the baby out with the bathwater, as the expression goes. I agree there's some tweaks that we need to look at this, both as permitted as well as conditional uses. But I don't want to see us go back and totally reinvent the wheel on this, because an awful lot of thought and effort and time has gone into what we've come up with today. I mean, you referenced the Lake Kempesca Water Project, or I'm sorry, the Lake Kempesca Master Plan, but we have to go back further than that, even going back to the H2O20 results that we were getting as far as what we were hearing from that. And I think that the culmination of this resulted in what we felt, we as a council, the 10-member council at that time, felt that, coming from the Planning Commission, felt that we were addressing and finding a compromise with what had been come out as far as public comments from a number of different sources. Now, having said that, I'm definitely in favor, if that's the route that we want to go, of looking at some tweaks to this. Councilman Danforth, you made a good comment here at some point in the past that maybe we want to look at limiting this to not prevent it from the lake side of a street, and only allowed on the off side of the street, other than the lake side. I think that's got validity, as well as looking at the permitted and conditional uses. But I'm not in favor of going back to square one and starting over with this process.
Councilman Paulson.
Thank you, Mayor. I do also want to point out that the couple times it's been used, I mean, there are significant investment into CL districts already, including on the lakeside and not the lakeside. There's both in use right now, and I think the investment in our community and in the people should speak volumes to what this has done already for our lake. And like I already said, tweaks may be necessary, but a full-on steering committee, full-on committee in general, I think is way over line, and I think you're going to upset the people who've already attempted to get it, already do have it, and the people who've invested hundreds of thousands of dollars into condos on the lake using this district, as well as those developers. So I do caution this a little bit, because what are we going to do? Is it are they already grandfathered in because they've already used it? Are we going to retroactively take away some of their uses? I don't think that's appropriate. I just want to caution on this, because it's already in use. There's already been significant money involved in this district.
Councilman Vilhauer has a follow-up to that question, and then I'll go to Councilman Danforth.
Not disagreeing with what you're saying, Councilman Paulson, but I guess I ask, how many CL districts have we approved since this has gone into effect?
I believe 2. Is that correct, Randy?
Can you refresh where those are?
One of them is large. I think it's 20-some acres out at Stony Point.
Okay,
maybe it's less than that, but that's one of them. And the second being, Prairie Winds.
Oh, sure.
Also had a CL approval.
I just had to draw a blank. Okay, thank you.
Mayor, if I could, since I'm talking, I wanted to recognize we have 2 planning commissioners with us in the crowd tonight. The entire planning commission was invited, and we have Commissioner Oletsky and Commissioner Dargis Johnson in the crowd with us tonight too. We asked them to come to observe the conversation in case few of them were plugged into a committee that may amend this zoning ordinance.
Thank you. And I did go over and ask them if they wanted to speak as a planning commission representative, and they declined as far as now. So, Councilman Danforth?
Thank you, Mayor. There seems to be a hesitancy to revisit an ordinance that there's a lot of concern with. We have 2 uses of it today, but we have 900 properties, I think it is, around the lake that property owners are not familiar with this ordinance language. I went through we have 3 documents that we use them interchangeably. We use them, and in some manner, they're tools that we come to a conclusion. And the 2 primary ones that were used in establishing the commercial lake ordinance would be the comprehensive use plan and the Lake Compesca master plan. And I've spent a fair amount of time going through the comprehensive use plan, trying to figure out exactly what it's saying, but I never did find what I thought it was saying. So I'm going to go back to, and I'm going to paraphrase a bit, a discussion when the Pelican development on the north side of Pelican was in front of this body, and we were having a lot of discussions regarding that, plus some follow-up meetings. But the question I had, what I learned from that point was, in gist, is Lake Compesca as a whole is considered a redevelopment area, which to me, when I read that, I'm not exactly sure what that's telling me. And what was stated at that time is that that whole redevelopment area should be considered for commercial CL development. Think about that. That whole lake should be considered for commercial lake development. When in area, I don't know, but in regards to what the property makeup is, 90% of that lake properties, not aggregate acres, is residential. When would we ever start plopping commercial development in and amongst our established neighborhoods that we have here? We'd never do that. We pick areas that are appropriate for some type of zoning. Commercial, industrial, R1, R2, R3, whatever it is. We don't start plopping commercial in amongst established residential areas. Colin, you referenced several times that this has been on the docket. I think the other night you said 20 years. That's not true. I sat on the Plan Commission for a lot of years. Never once was commercialization of the lake or zoning ever mentioned. What we did have is a lot of discussion about the need for residential lake zoning and to go away from just using our standard residential zoning that we have in our ordinances within city proper per se. Every discussion in 8-9 years that I was on, and through all the years I was on the council, probably till the tail end of that, was always about residential zoning at the lake. Never was it commercial. So I have a lot of concerns. I have a lot of thoughts on it. I will promise you that if we stay with what we have, we're going to have a fight every time. Every time there's any consideration for commercial zoning, we're going to have it every time out there. And I do believe, based on my involvement, based on reading the Compesca master plan, I don't believe that our ordinance reflects what people were wanting. And I think there's a difference between when people say at the lake, and we use that generically, I think that's different than on the lake, meaning waterfront property. I think that's different than across the road. I think it's different than a quarter mile away. That's all at the lake. But I do believe that on the lake needs to be much stricter in regards to what we allow there in our planning than across the road or farther away. Those are the discussions that I would like to be able to have, and I see nothing wrong with discussion. The end of a discussion, whatever that is, if we make no changes, then all we did is waste some of our time and other people's time. I think it's necessary, and I think we're going to hear that it's necessary when we start having some public input meetings on this, if we do. I think we're going to find that out real quick. So, but I have for right now anyway.
Councilman Shetty.
Thank you, Mayor. This is one of the first councils now, with this CL zoning. There was a previous one shortly. And if we just look at what we've had to work through, there's been some CLs during our time here. And then there's an R3. The reason I bring up an R3 because it kind of works together with this, that we've had to work through. And it's been the same concerns from the latest R3 that we had to do here like a month or two ago, the last couple CLs. One of the similarities in each one of those was the size and magnitude of what the R3 or what a CL would deem what you could use there. For example, a 60-foot tall structure for a CL, I believe, is what it is, or 55 for an R3. And then, so what if you were to build to the max of that for height, which meaning you probably have a facility that has apartments or something to that nature, so then you have a much more traffic flow. And so that seems to be the common denominator from Pelican CL to this at Lake Compesca CL is there's not a like an R2B we talked about, should there be something between the R2 and the R3? Well, same thing with the CL. Is there value in validity in as we work through this? And there's many other points too that are brought up, but again, to have it to where it's some changes as we're learning and growing in this, to where the magnitude, because when I voted on the last CL, I wasn't voting against necessarily the development that was being brought forth. I'm voting for the CL, which I was voting for the max of what a CL could do there. And so that's where can we have a little more as a council or as a city to help navigate through this and have less issues as we work through this, to have some other changes made to where we can separate out and have, okay, here's where we can use this type of CL that's designated for those larger apartment or whatever type structures versus some other types of CL designated properties. So I guess that's what I'm seeing as a common denominator is traffic flow and size and height and magnitude that if we can address that's one area that seems to be always the issue when it's brought up by the public is that scenario.
Thank you, Councilman. I'll go to Councilman Bueller, but since you just said that, I am in agreement with some sort of levels, simply because when the last two proposals have come forward for CL zoning, people are voting not necessarily against that project, but about what could be occurring on that land. Because I look at the permitted uses, and if you approve CL, I mean, apartments are drastically different than a retail establishment or a restaurant. And to have that broad range, once you permit CL, and then anything under permitted uses could go in there, that is something I would at least like to know what is going in there, or at least limit it down. Director Von Eye?
Yes, to that point, I think that I had a good conversation with Councilman Bueller earlier today regarding that, and some of the things on that list are a little more shocking and maybe raise an eyebrow to think, why would we want that there? And I just want to provide some context through the discussions that were had when this ordinance was drafted as it is, because there's a lot of behind-the-scenes stuff that I think might be a good reason to amend it, because it's not clear. But the reasons some of those things are on the list is because the design criteria that go along with them really do inherently prohibit what's going to happen to a magnitude and scope of what people fear might happen. The design criteria that include 50% lot coverage maximum, for example. So to think that any given lot on the lake is going to have a 60-foot apartment building with that number of units and the amount of parking that would require and still meet a 50% lot coverage rule, probably ain't going to happen. Now, I know things could happen, but that was the intent behind that. The design criteria that go with each one of those uses inherently make a lot of the jaw-dropping, shock and awe type of uses really go away. But again, I'm in complete favor of making that more clear if need be. That's not an opposition to staff at all. I'm just trying to provide the context on why some of those things are in there. It's because of the design criteria that go along with them that prevent some of the very egregious stuff from happening.
Well, and I thank you for that, but I would say from the design criteria standpoint, the thought that went into the design criteria itself lends credence to the fact that you had recognized, or the people had recognized, that some things would be more preferable and allowable than others. So I think we could just take that a step further and put that directly into the language and not just leave it up to the interpretation of the language. That's just how I feel about it. Councilman Beeler?
Thank you, Mayor. You know, one thing we had to keep in mind, I guess, is that whatever we've got here, whatever's in this ordinance, it still has to be applied for, and it has to get through the Planning Commission, and it has to get through the council for them to be able to receive this designation for that district. I will concur with Councilman Danforth in regards to the comment that this was 20 years ago, because it absolutely was not, because I've been involved with city government now since Shep was a pup, and it sure wasn't that. But the other thing, you know, we'd mentioned condos that have already been, and just to clarify, Stony Point was zoned as a C2, if I'm not mistaken. It was not a CL district. And I think that all the people that worked on this putting this together, I think there were 9 people involved with that. That's how many. Now we got 95% of the shoreline around Lake Compesca is developed. And I have to concur a little bit with Mike. Again, this has to be, somebody has to be allowed to take this district on. If they have to apply for it, it has to be allowed. But when you look at the permitted uses and you look at lakeside property, that 5% that might be available for development right now, some of these things are a little bit radical to me. I don't think they're things that folks, especially residential locations, would necessarily want there. And that would certainly be taken into account when somebody applied for that. But there was some conversation also about, you know, not making a big deal out of this to tweak it. Well, there are processes in place. If you tweak it, you're still changing it. So you're going to have to go through those processes. It's going to have to go. There's going to have to. If we decide as a group, yeah, let's put together, because I think that's what we're being asked tonight is, do you want to put together a committee to review this, and look at that and say this is something that maybe we ought to revise. Maybe we tweak it. Maybe we make some major overhauls if that's what comes back from the committee. But I think at the end of the day, we make a decision in that regard. That would then, I think, and I'll ask Amanda to clarify if I'm incorrect on this. This would then go to the Planning Commission for them to review our proposals. Then the Planning Commission would decide whether or not they felt like we should do anything with it. They could say we don't want to do anything. And then there's a 60-day period where it would go to the city council for us to look at. If they say no, then it would still, I believe, come to the city council, but we'd have to have a 2/3 majority vote to agree to making those changes. So, but when I look at from my planning days, and God knows everybody's heard how many years I've been on the planning commission, but you look at all these. There's a number of these that would certainly bring up some concern for me if I were a resident on that lake and that was going to be adjacent to my home. I don't think it's going to hurt anything to look at this. I don't see it being a big problem. We get some good folks together and say, yeah, maybe we ought to change this to more of a hybrid. So we've got people that are adjacent to the water versus folks across the road. That might make a little bit of difference too. So, and if you look at this, I would take to task anybody on this plan or on the council to look at this and be able to say exactly what some of these terms mean. What does this encompass? Excuse me, Randy. What does that include? Service establishments. I mean, Randy could. I'm not picking on you, but I'm just saying. Would you know exactly what that means? No. I think that's probably true for a lot of us. Retail establishments. What does that mean? Recreational use. Recreation facility. I know what that means, but some of us might not know that. Storage. Quit it. He said hot yoga. Yeah, well, put that out next to Brad's place. But anyway, those are just some of my concerns and my thoughts for what they're worth. Thank you.
City Manager Mack.
First, yes, you are correct. That is the process. If a committee is formed, any recommendations to change the ordinance would then go to the Plan Commission, and they'd follow the process as outlined by Councilman Bueller. I did have someone text me a question that maybe Attorney Carrico can answer. For those that, or for properties that already have the commercial lake zoning, if any changes are made, how would that impact their currently zoned property?
Without totally delving into it, I would say generally speaking, they would need to be grandfathered in. They applied under the previous ordinance, so in their mind, they should be able to. Some of them are, and that would also depend on whether or not their projects were currently going. But I would also defer if there have been any situations in the past where you guys have done stuff like that to the Public Works Director?
Actually, the adoption of the entire zoning ordinance, the minute we adopted the entire zoning ordinance, you can imagine the number of nonconformities that were created in one fell swoop. And there is language in the ordinance that relate to those things that existed prior to the adoption of the zoning ordinance as a whole. So really, I'd treat this no differently as we amend certain sections of the zoning ordinance over time. It's it'd be imperative in my mind that you demark the date and time of that change so that things prior to that are deemed not effective, not affected by the new language. However, in those circumstances, when they go to make a major improvement or to get certain building permits and things of that nature, they are required to follow the new zoning language. Like, for instance, if a building fell down in a downtown zoning district and was a grandfathered in use, so to speak, it would have to be brought up to the new zoning standards. So we'd have to wade through those nuances to make sure that we're not impacting active development in an adverse manner. Yeah, those two zoning districts in particular, we'd have to be sensitive to and how to handle those.
Councilman Paulson.
Thank you, Mayor. So I'll admit, let's say 20 years was a slight exaggeration, but I've been almost back for 10 years in Watertown, and it exceeds that. So it's far beyond 10 years. So even if it wasn't 20, it's more than 10 that there's been some level of discussion of putting commercialization on the lake. You know, we have a couple council members that continually mention that they were on the Plan Commission, and that's fine. That's great. But the Plan Commission also approved this and brought it forward to us. And I do think it'd be a slap in the face to not only our Plan Commission, but our staff, that we keep telling them that they're wrong. Continually. Every single redevelopment that comes up, there's a fight on our hands. And that goes to this point too. Every redevelopment is a fight in Watertown. And that there's a reason why. It's because you're trying to retrofit something in that wasn't originally there. And that's part of redevelopment. In any community, in any universe, redevelopment doesn't mean that it was already planned for that. And that's why it is getting a little frustrating, because everything is a fight. And we want, it seems to me, that this council wants everything to be a PUD, and we need to know exactly every single detail. I mean, pretty much sometimes we're asking for, where's this nail going to be in the stud? Like, we have to trust our staff at some point that there are rules in place. There's a process in place for redevelopment or zoning in general, or rezoning as well. And I just think, you know, that includes setbacks too. And that's why there's extreme setbacks on the CL district. This is not a PUD, this is a zoning. And I don't think we need every single detail. That's why I don't think we need a committee at all to look at this and ask for every single detail or redefine every single thing. Because that's why we have staff members. You know, Stony Point, for example, there was an MOU completed by the previous council for Stony Point, which included a hotel in the CL district. And now all of a sudden we want to change that, and I think we're going down a road that is going to lead to a disaster. And I would also caution, if we do move in a position of a committee, that I think we've proven that we're anti-development over and over again, whether we want to agree with the anti-redevelopment, I should put. I would question or strongly urge that there's not a committee brought together with all anti-redevelopment people on the board.
Councilman Tupper?
About 3 questions here, Mayor. First off, somebody made a comment that 95% of the property around the lake, or maybe we should look at this as a lakeside or a non-lakeside. What's that? Lakeside development. Logic, if I'm looking at this, logic would tell me that any of these permitted uses aren't going to work on a lakeside anyhow. You know, retail establishments, service establishments, maybe a restaurant would. Recreational campground, storage shed. At the price and value of property around Lake Compesca, somebody's not going to buy 3 or 4 houses to put a storage unit up. It's just not going to pencil out. So looking at that, you know, as far as splitting it lakeside, non-lakeside, I wouldn't agree with that. How long, if we were to take this up, how long do you think this process would last? Can anybody give me an answer?
I'll say it depends on who's involved and what availability people make, and because that's going to come back to this council. So, you know, anything that is even proposed or considered. So, you know, Randy, that's typically these things can take 3 to 6 months. I was on a plan commission sorry about that, but I was, where we went through a sign ordinance for 2 years.
You took the words right out of my mouth.
And
so.
I don't see this being a sign ordinance, okay?
But it could be.
Well, if you want to make it that way.
Yeah.
You know, it could be longer, Andy. You're asking a question that we really don't know.
So what do we do in the meantime? Just stop progress?
Well, in the interim, the ordinance is as it is, and if individuals choose to apply under the ordinance as it is, they would follow the process as they do today.
Okay.
And it would eventually come to this body for deliberation and a decision.
One last comment. I tend to agree to a point. You know, maybe if we look at it and we can just leave it as is for now, and if we see anything, bring something forward for a change, but not spend 2 years doing it, because I've seen the city do that too many times. This body has a tendency of kicking the can down the road. You know, I don't want to see that. I've seen that with the sign ordinance. I've seen moratoriums. Someplace we have to trust our staff, the hard work that those 22 people put in. Does it maybe need a tweak or two? Yeah. But, you know, if we're going to do it, let's say it's got to be done in 90 days. We can drag our feet, and I don't think we show a lot of respect for our Plan Commission and Board of Adjustments right now. They have a thankless job. They put in a lot of time and effort into this, and so did our staff. So someplace we've got to draw a line and quit kicking the can.
Councilman Vilhauer.
Thank you, Mayor. I guess I said earlier I'm not opposed to taking an overview or tweaking this, but again, I'll say the process that was followed going back several years now, unanimously approved by the Planning Commission, and there's some pretty divergent opinions on that Planning Commission that approved this. They voted unanimously on this. It came before a 10-member city council of which 3 of us up here are sitting here and approved it unanimously, why can't we trust the process at all? And we still control what goes on going forward to a large degree, because it still comes before the Planning Commission and the City Council if there is going to be a change in zoning. So I'm in favor of looking at some of the potential uses, but as far as going back to step 1 on this, I think we're wasting a lot of people's times and not trusting their discretion and the work that they did several years ago on this.
Councilman Danforth?
One thing we can't do, and we shouldn't do, we should never assume that it won't happen. And I've said this before. We must assume it will happen. Because if it never happens, that's great. If it does happen, we're kind of SOL, so to speak. Now we've got something that we have to answer to. I have seen people buy 2 and 3 lots out here at exorbitant prices and tear everything down and build a multi-million-dollar home. So we can't say it's not going to happen, because $1 million to people in Watertown is different than somebody in Chicago or New York or New Jersey or wherever they're at. This is really cheap to them. So to come in here and whatever it is, anything on that list might be just really cheap to them, and they don't live here. But some of the questions I have, I truly believe development at Lake Pelican and the rules and the governance there for good development is different than what is on Lake Compesca. One is 95 to 99% through the process and developing really outside of the boundaries of the lakefront. That's a completely different status as Lake Pelican. You know, I don't know what it is, 75%, 70% of Lake Pelican is agriculture around it. There's some homes and there's whatever around there, but so there's a lot of opportunity that's different on Lake Pelican than it is on Lake Compesca. I wouldn't feel that way if Lake Compesca was mostly developed and like Compesca where it's residential. So we do have the opportunity to look at this, and one of my suggestions is we got to have, if we're going to have lake zoning, and especially when it comes to commercial, the rules for Pelican are different than what they are, in my opinion, for Compesca. And they should be different, just because of where they're at. Some of the questions I have, why would we have, as I don't know if it's a permitted use or conditional use, why would we have apartments in a commercial zoning ordinance when we have R2 and R3 zoning? Why would we do that? Not sure. Why would we have somebody, and it'll happen, where somebody buys an extra lot because they got lots of money, and you know what, they're going to put up a storage shed. Well, we've got the RG zoning for that out and around the lake and within the city, and that's where that initiated at, was from the lake. Why would we, this is another one I don't understand, when does a personal storage shed or whatever they call them, why is that commercial? It doesn't fit the bill for commercial. Why is my personal storage shed commercial? Makes no sense. We talk about tweaking. Is somebody going to define tweak? What does that mean? And I will be really interested at some point in time to find out from the people that were very, very interested in or involved in the Lake Compesca master plan and see if they agree with what's within our ordinance. I can't wait for that moment, because when I was sat in some of those meetings, when I went up to the meeting or the public viewing of that at Lake Area Tech, that is not what I heard from the public up there, that this ordinance reflects what those people wanted at all. So I'm not sure what we're afraid of. I'm not here to offend anybody, but I'm more and most concerned with having an ordinance that really does fit good development based on what we're trying to do than I am. And I apologize. I think we got two ladies out here right now that are on the plan commission. I apologize if I hurt your feelings on my position. I'm not worried about your feelings. I'm sorry, I'm not. I'm worried about an ordinance, and that's where I'm coming from. Let's do it right. Let's not, we've had 100 and some years of poor planning and management that we deal with in and around our lake and in parts of our community as well. Let's not continue that. Let's do it right.
Councilman Beeler?
Thank you, Mayor. First off, I want to say I think our planning commission is great, and especially the two ladies here today, because they've been doing it for a long time. And I see what they do. I watch them. I do actually watch that on TV, mostly when I can't sleep. But no, I'm kidding. But just, Colin, to your point about ordinance changes, we have made umpteen changes to our zoning ordinances over the years. We tweak ordinances all the time. In fact, I bet if you asked Heath, he could tell you they got many of them on the books. And these are things that people have developed over the years, but things change, times change, and we rethink these, we look at them again, and when I'm dead, there's going to be councils that are going to say, what the hell, we need to change this, and that's okay. We do it all the time. Highway, just an example of what happens with some of the ordinances that we've had to change. Highway 20 I should say Highway 20. Highway 20 had C2 with residential in it for years. And of course we did have to make those changes because folks wanted to rebuild. They couldn't get loans for that property unless it was zoned in residential. So we made those changes. But I don't want to say that we fight. I don't think we fight. We have good discussions. What I don't want us to say is we're anti-development. We're not. I think we're all for responsible development, I think, is what we are. And, we talk about, Colin, you'd mentioned a lot of PUDs. How many PUDs have we done? One or two in the last how many years? Not very many. We haven't done very many PUDs. And you'd mentioned the hotel that was allowed on that C2. Well, C2 allows for hotels. That's where we've got development at Stony Point. And so, I think at the end of the day, all of us can walk out of here and get along, and I want us to keep it that way. But I don't see this as a fight. I see this as a spirited discussion from time to time. And so I'm not opposed. I'm not ready to die on this field, but I'm not opposed to if folks are willing to take the time to take a gander at this thing and look at maybe some revisions or, like Mike said, a tweak, which I agree. I don't know necessarily what a tweak means, but I'm okay with that. And I would volunteer to be a part of that if the mayor sees fit for me to be in that group. And I do appreciate all the effort that's gone into these, as I would with every ordinance that we have developed. But again, we change ordinances, we tweak them, redevelop them all the time. Would you disagree with that, Heath?
Yeah, that's a fact. We obviously review and improve and tweak things on a regular basis. Not to dispute either council member's comments. I think you both probably understand that fact.
Thank you, Heath. That's all I have for now.
Director Von Eye was going to say something, but Director Von Eye.
Yes, if I could, I was going to touch on, try to give some context. I know Councilman Danforth has mentioned a few times, why is this listed or what's the intent behind it? And I can understand why those questions are coming up without having been in the meetings where we talked through these uses and how they made sense to plug into the CL. Storage shop, why is that a commercial use? Well, that's a darn good question. I think I asked that exact same question in the committee meeting when we started talking about putting storage shops on the list of permitted uses in a CL district. And so, if I could, I was just going to give some context under and rattle down this list really quick. Retail establishments, that's pretty self-explanatory. Things for sale, and most commercial. When we think commercial zoning, that's one of the first things that comes to mind, is a place where you go to buy something. Service establishments, that's permitted use number 2. The main one that comes to mind there that was in our discussions, and I'm thinking back a couple years now, was things like a salon or a spa, where you don't just go to get your hair cut, but maybe it's a massage place, or somewhere you can get other types of personal services like that you'd find in a salon or a spa type of a setting. And I think the committee at the time and the boards at the time thought, yeah, a spa at the lake, why not? That sounds perfect. So that would fall under a service establishment. It's not to say there aren't any other things that would go on that list that you might not want at the lake either, though. Restaurants, self-explanatory. Recreational use, that one too I think is pretty self-explanatory on why that would be at a lake. Campground, same thing. Storage shops. Now that one would not conventionally be a commercial use, but I'd touch on that one, and why not the RG. I think that if I remember right, the RG has its own zoning district requirements in relation to the minimum lot size required to zone something in RG, which is a residential garage district, for those that are wondering. And we decided, well, let's take these storage shops, because we could see them at the lake, like we've seen some built, and frankly been very quickly gobbled up for use by the community. Had been a very popular item out there along the lake or near the lake. And the committee and the planning commission and council at the time thought, yeah, these could be an approved use. You could, lakeside or non-lakeside, somebody could have a series of personal storage shops for their boats, their jet skis, their what have you that's lake related, and pull up to a storage shop on their lot that they own, on this storage shop that they built on their own land for their own personal use for the day with their friends and family and what have you. So that's why storage shops got put in there. Even though it's not a conventional commercial use, it was one of those uses that we thought would make sense to plug into this commercial definition, because of all the other constraints that come into play when you try to rezone it something else, I think is the bottom line there. Apartments, those can be many things. The definition of apartment or zoning ordinance has room for improvement. I'll be the first to admit that. But the way it's defined, an apartment could mean many things. And the reason that was listed is a condo falls under the definition of an apartment. If we wanted to open up the lake for more usage for rental residencies, an apartment definition fit that need. And that was one of the needs identified, is having places around the lake where you could rent somewhere to live and not have to own the property. And so that's where the apartment definition got plugged into that. And again, the sizing, the magnitude, that's where the design standards would come into play, that even if you bought 3 lots or 5 lots, no matter what the size, you're going to be restricted with those design standards on how big of a magnitude of an impact that might have. But that doesn't mean we couldn't add something to this ordinance that says maximum height X feet. I mean, those things seem reasonable. Recreation facility. Brandy would know better than I. Recreation use, recreation facility, there's some nuance in their definitions, but both were applicable around the lake. And then a religious institution, Freedom of Religion Act, of course, comes into play with any zoning district. So that's why that's there. And then some of the conditional uses, car wash. I just want to use this as an example because I kind of laugh when I think about it now. We actually had to go in and define what a car wash was because we were sensitive to it being built for the wrong purpose or the wrong function. So we, as the planning commissioners, the committee, we actually defined a car wash because we didn't have a definition for one. So that's how sensitive we were to some of these uses, to make sure we got some of them, make sure they were right and set up appropriately. Storage units, again, those are the ones that are not allowed to have water or sewer services. I think that we thought that the market would drive that. Is somebody going to buy X dollars worth of land lakeside and build some tin sheds with roll-up garage doors? Probably not. Is it likely going to happen on the opposite side of the road? where storage units would be a very functional, viable use around the lake because of all the toys that go around the lake? Absolutely. So that's why that use was tucked in there as a conditional use. So that the boards could assess, the BOA could assess, where is it going? Is it going lakeside or is it going across the road? Those things they can consider when they're considering a conditional use. With that, I'll pause, and I know Brandy maybe had some additional comments. Did you want to touch on anything else, Brandy? No? You sure? Okay. She was apparently thinking my thoughts there, so I talked through them to her satisfaction. So with that, that's all I wanted to offer up.
I guess I have a question of clarification for the council, but I'll preface it with a few comments because I do think that revisions can and should be made to the CL, but I am hesitant to form a committee for several different reasons. Number one, the length of time and what is its purpose. We need to spell it out specifically. And also, I do not think that this is necessarily something that I want just a select few people to be in on. I think it deserves, if we're going to do it, just bring forward an actionable item to the entire city council and do it at a public hearing so people can come and testify on it. That way it's an open meeting and everyone can see it and see the discussion and it's on record and we're all there, but it needs an actionable item to do it. A committee meeting is, I don't have an incredibly high opinion of committee meetings. I'll just say that. But an actionable item is something that I would look forward to on CL because, at least from my perspective, I have an issue with the uses. I would like them separated so that we know what is going to happen at a specific location and not what could happen. Because otherwise we would vote on the fear of what could happen as opposed to what is going to be going in there. However, there's also a question that I have, which is, I think we've all used the term tweak. Well, a tweak is very different than a full-on committee revision. And I guess I would need to know exactly what the desire of the council was, because a tweak in my mind would be like what I just proposed, which is let's go into permitted uses and separate them out. Now, I could write that up with staff's help and bring it to council next meeting, and then we can have a public meeting and let's do it. If that's the desire as a tweak, then let's bring forward an actionable item and have that discussion. But if you want a line-by-line review of CL, that's a much larger dive, but I'm not even sure excuse me, I apologize for that. Yeah. I'm not even sure if anyone has proposed that, but I want to make that clear. I need to know what the desire is. Is it a full-on, let's look at everything with CL? Because there's a lot right with it. It seems to me that the problem that we've had is in the permitted and conditional uses, so let's just focus on that. I would just need some clarification on that. So is it a tweak? Is it a full-on revision? The two very different things. Councilman Danforth?
I think you go through the process and see where you get. I think we're trying to, I guess somebody's going to have to really clearly define tweak for me. I'm not saying that we take this and throw it out and start over. I think there's a couple of probably there's three primary considerations. Is Compesca separate from Pelican? Because, again, in my opinion, it should be, because what's, in my opinion, again, my opinion, and what I also think a lot of the people are going to agree with is I see what we may allow or disallow at Compesca being different than what may or may not be allowed at Lake Pelican. So if having that discussion and coming to a decision, if that's a tweak, so be it. I really don't care. I think the second thing is, and I heard it, and I'm not pointing my finger at Heath, but I am, only because of what he said. And a couple things, and what he said is right. A couple things were very interesting. One of his descriptions, he used the word probably. And that's the problem, is it probably won't happen, but it might. One of the other ones Eddie said is that I'm going to use the car washes as an example. Probably more appropriate use, he said, across the street somewhere, not on the lake. Well, then, if that's the case, why not disallow it for being placed on the lake, if that's the case? And that's where I'm coming from. Some of these are very fitting for, I'm going to say at the lake, but not on the lake. In proximity to the lake, they're appropriate. On the lake, once they're there for a long, long time. And so those two items are, to me, are really important. And then some of the basic uses themselves and conditional uses. This body's going to change. Plan commission or committee, that's going to change over time. And we don't know those bodies of people are going to approve in the future. If they look at what we do here, and in the end we make changes, tweaks, whatever, they can change it if they don't like it. That's their responsibility. So I think we're worried about the extent of a change when we haven't even heard everybody's concerns, whatever concerns they may have. So we're limiting ourselves, or apparently boxing ourselves in a corner. And to me, Mayor, and I disagree with you, I'm a firm believer that if committees are done right and they represent everybody, all their purpose is to do some legwork and bring it back. And that's what I see. I think it makes it more effective. Personally, I think some of the things that we've had in front of us would be more effective handled in a committee format, brought back. We can do whatever. It doesn't matter. At some point, we got to have public input, and I think that's where we're really going to hear what should be in this ordinance, in my opinion. So.
And Councilman, just to explain, from my perspective, it's not necessary. I like the idea of the public comment, but I think that we all should hear it. I guess I don't just want to punish a few select members of the council, but all of us. With more meetings.
You mean hearing the public input?
Yeah.
The public input should happen right here.
Mm-hmm.
The committee is at least to hear the baseline concerns and ideas that people have. Maybe you write up proposals on option A, option B, and then at least it's in a format that we have an aggregate list of concerns that comes back here that people can read ahead of time and see what the ideas and thoughts and suggestions are. I'm not suggesting having public input at those committee meetings and everybody else not hearing that. I think it's really important that the public input occur right here in this room. Once a committee's draft of issues, not necessarily draft ordinance, but draft issues and potential solutions within that, and then that be provided to the whole council and to the public, for that matter, for consideration and discussion. I think it just makes for a smoother, better process. But again, doesn't matter. It can work any way we want. Let's get over this tweak versus change thing. It's a change, whatever it is. To what level that is, we'll find that out.
Councilman Billhauer?
Thank you, Mayor. As I listen to the seven of us debate this issue, I'm hearing us all say the same thing, strangely enough. I mean, I think we all agree that there are some things that we should look at here. I agree completely with you, Mike. I said that early on. As far as lakeside versus off lakeside, I agree that needs to be looked at. The uses. I mean, I think we're all saying that. It's just a matter of how we go about going through that process now without killing a bunch of staff time and without dragging this thing on for 6-9 months or longer. That's what I'm concerned about. So however we can most efficiently do it, I think we're all saying the same thing.
And I would say, sorry, Councilman, I don't want to stifle discussion, but I don't disagree with you, Councilman Billhauer, and even listening to Councilman Danforth, it's very close to how I feel. I just feel like not going through the committee process and just, the three proposals that you had, Compesca versus Pelican, on lake versus proximity to lake, and the uses, I agree to all three of those, and I think let's have a proposal, bring it to the council, and then we have the public discussion. That way the entire public can comment on it. So it's just, I guess, just bringing it faster and making sure that all of us can hear the full-on public comments. Councilman Paulson?
Thank you, Mayor. I guess from what I'm hearing from staff is that they generally support this zoning requirement, zoning designation. And I guess I like your suggestion is that you and staff bring forward a few changes that you would like to make and see where that goes. But I've already said I'm not in favor of a committee because, I mean, do we have different residential requirements for the different two lakes? No. Why is commercial different? I understand that it's built out differently, and that's just because of how it was built out. That's not something we can control or did control in the past. And it just worries me that if all of a sudden we're just creating zoning, a different zoning here and a different zoning here, we're getting too much into the weeds that I don't think. I mean, we can talk about the worst case scenario. Are we going to flood every year in Watertown? Probably not, but we possibly could. Should we? Does that mean that we should make everyone raise their house 4 feet so they don't get water? No. You know, we could talk about worst case scenarios, and every zone has that. I mean, we could talk about R1. I could go concrete my entire yard. Am I going to? No, but I could. Are my neighbors going to like it? No. I mean, I'm just saying that we could go down into the worst case scenario for every single zone and pick it apart, and we could redo this for everything. Our whole ordinance book we could. And that's where I guess I don't agree with that. I think it's generally a good ordinance, good zoning requirements. Like I said, I would strongly support you making changes with staff that you guys deem necessary and bring it forward to us.
Councilman Tupper.
I think it's kind of a general consensus that the majority of us agree with the three things that Councilman Danforth brought up. So we've kind of identified where we got to go with it, really. I think over the next week or two that we should send you and Amanda our thoughts and ideas and questions, and then plan a meeting on it that's open to the public so we get the public input on it. Whether or not, I mean, I strongly feel that the Plan Commission should be included on that. Whether or not we can do that or not legally, I don't know. But, you know, here, we can sit and talk about it forever. We all have 7 different opinions, but I think we've kind of come to the general agreement to the 3 issues that we're addressing. So that would be what kind of where I'm thinking on it. So,
thank you, Councilman. Director Von Eye.
Yeah, first I want to thank Councilman Danforth for picking up on the breadcrumb I left him on the use of the term probably, because it does help. It does help the cause he's trying to speak to. I wanted to reemphasize or point out that some of the concerns like a car wash or storage units, those do because they're conditional uses have to go to the Board of Adjustment, and so that the Board of Adjustment is a final acting body when it comes to conditional uses. Those would not rise to the City Council level. So again, I can respect the council's ideology on behind, is that list appropriate? Is it all right? Does it set the table perfectly for the Board of Adjustment to pick and choose if these conditional uses are going to happen at the lake or not? Because that's how that would transpire. Somebody comes in for a storage unit, they want to put it on the water at the lakeside, and the BOA for some reason says yes. I think that's contrary to what Councilman Danforth is saying we would want to see happen. Now, again, going back to when this was written, the logic was the BOA is not going to approve storage units on the lake shore. But that's not to say they couldn't. So I just want to point that out. All those conditional uses would go to the BOA. That would be the final deciding board on those conditional uses.
Thank you. Any further council discussion? I do not see any consensus on the committee versus non-committee, but I do see a consensus in bringing revisions to CL. So unless, City Manager Mack, unless I'm reading it incorrectly, I'm going to interpret the conversation as we are going to be bringing proposals forward as an actionable item in front of the entire council. City Manager Mack?
So I just want to clarify, and then, so the 3 issues that this consensus thinks needs to be looked at is Pelican and Compesca, should they be the same? And the uses, permitted and conditional. First, is that right? Is that what we're hearing?
And proximity?
Okay.
Is it like
on
which
the lake,
versus,
at the lake.
Yeah.
Okay.
Proximity mean? I mean, are we talking mile from the lake?
I would say.
Well, the second piece that I have is reasonable. So this body, I'm trying to think this out loud, so please forgive me. We would work internally, bring some proposed amendments for discussion at a future work session. If there is consensus around those amendments, they would then go to the Planning Commission. And then eventually this body would vote on them. Am I hearing correctly?
I think that would be the process.
Okay. We'll proceed accordingly then.
All right. Any further discussion? Yes, Councilman Danforth?
To what extent do we bring the county into this discussion? And so that we're on the same page as to what good and effective development around these areas are, so that what they may allow maybe isn't in the long term what we would necessarily allow. Is there a point at which we really should be having discussions with the county to kind of come on to with some planning guidelines for the areas? Because what's going to happen, we're talking about redevelopment, but there's also development, and that is those areas that are in proximity to the lake that somebody may want to develop and annex into the city. Is there a point at which we should have discussions so that we're kind of on the same page, even though we're governed differently, so that we know that what they want to allow and the way that they're going to go about things at least would be somewhat similar to what we would want long term?
Director Von Eyde, do you want to address that?
Yeah, I could. So our relationships with First District, who actually acts as the planning agency for the county, we're frequently interacting with them. Luke Mueller, of course, acts as the zoning administrator for the county from a regulatory standpoint, and he's in the processes with us for most 90% of what we do. He's in our staff review meetings for all the work that we do within the city. So I would guess that his opinions and expertise would weigh into exactly the concern that you're bringing up there, Councilman.
Why that's important is that it goes to Randy's question: is what's proximity? There's development potential in proximity to the lake that's not within the city limits that ultimately at some point would come to the Plan Commission. And I think anything that we do here with a couple other of our ordinances, I think make their jobs easier. It really does. Their decision making, it makes it easier. And I think Bruce or somebody had said, that's a thankless job. It is. It's a tough job. It's hard. So if we can do things that makes that job easier, more guidelines, more well-defined, we win, they win, and hopefully the people that are looking to develop or build something have a clear understanding of what they can ask for. So,
And I'm not opposed to hearing if the county has anything on its mind, but we also, what is the name of the joint jurisdiction for like a mile? So we're kind of covered to some extent. Councilman Villauer, that was, yeah. Yeah, so I know that, but I'm not opposed at all to at least contacting our commissioners and asking them if they have had any concerns or questions. So, Councilman Beeler?
Thank you, Mayor. You know, where I could see where that could have some impact would certainly be on properties on Lake Pelican that would be adjacent to the county. How we deal with that, I could see where that would be of importance to them. But yeah, the joint jurisdiction. Todd, who works with First District, would certainly be abreast of that, and I would think would communicate that to the county planning group.
Any further discussion? I will close discussion on item C. And are there any future council items read ahead? City Manager Mack.
We do have one, Mayor, Director Von Eye, if you'd like to discuss the 14th Avenue Bridge.
Yeah, I just want to give the council a quick heads up. At the next regular meeting, we'll have a MOU drafted for the council's consideration. I'm anticipating it'll be on next Monday's council meeting. It's pending staff's work with the county staff on making sure the language is what all the staff people think is appropriate before it goes before the boards. But anyway, it's in relation to the county's reconstruction of the 14th Avenue North Bridge. We talked about it briefly a couple months back, but this would be the memorandum of understanding on our cost share in that structure project. If you recall, the county could replace the structure as is, where is, for X dollars. They approached the city. They asked us if we'd want to see it widened for any future city considerations and growth and development. Our response to that at staff level was yes, absolutely, would like to see that considered. And so it breaks out to roughly I say roughly, but exactly, a 62-38 split on the cost share, 62% county, 32% city. Of course, the MOU and any subsequent agreements would all be contingent upon the county receiving a big grant, a bridge improvement grant program grant. Saying big grant is redundant, I realize, but I just wanted to point that out. The county would be applying for that, and our agreements moving forward with that cost share would be under the premise that they would receive a grant from the state, which of course helps with those costs all the more tremendously. So that's just a heads up.
City Manager Mack, anything else? No, sir. All right. I will open it up now for public comment. If anyone is here who would like to address the council on an item that is not on today's agenda, now is your time to do so. Yeah, but I thought you had something else that you wanted to. I can allow that.
Thank you, Mayor. Mark Roby, 346 North Lake Drive, board member of Lake Kempeska Water Project District. I would just encourage staff, as you put the recommendations together for the council, that you use the Kempeska Master Plan and also add disconnected or poorly connected wetlands, potential new connected wetlands, and disconnected wetlands as areas that can be compromised with CL development, which really is 90% of the lake is not part of that. So you're talking maybe 10, 15%. I liken that to the proximity discussion on the lake or off the lake. I think the Lake Kempeska Water Project District would be quite happy if you considered that as part of the evaluations. Thank you. That's all I have.
All right, thank you. Any further public comments? I'll close public comment. We do have a reason to go into executive session tonight for a contractual and a personnel issue. We will not be taking any action when we're out. So I will go into executive session and we will adjourn when we come out. So I need a motion to go into executive session made by Councilman
Mayor,
Tupper.
before you do that,
Councilman Danforth?
can we just make sure that we make the announcement on the public meeting tomorrow night?
Oh, yes, thank you. City Manager Mack?
Public meeting tomorrow night, 5:30 p.m., excuse me, here at City Hall on the City Hall and street facility projects.
All right, thank you very much. Councilman Shuddy, I think that we might need to send you a separate Teams invite. I'm not sure. I'll get that situated with our IT here. So just stay frosty for a moment.
Thank you, Mayor.
But motion was made by Councilman Tupper, seconded by Councilman Beeler. Any discussion on going into executive session? Hearing none, all those in favor of going into executive session, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed, say nay. Motion carries.